From the heartland of America, it's the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf. Executive producer, David Stuckman.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I'm the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 38 years. Now, I always lead with that intro. I've been working in bail for almost 4 decades, and that gives me some degree of expertise in bail. And me pointing out my experience is sort of an appeal to authority, which is a persuasion technique, implying that you should listen to me because of all of my years of experience. And while, of course, you should listen to me, the truth of the matter is that the so-called experts have taken quite a beating over the past few years. Was COVID created in a Chinese lab or a live food market? Was a certain laptop actually misinformation or a smoking gun? Was the last president as sharp as a tack, or was he beating Medicaid? And the experts have assured us that on all of these claims, they're absolutely true on both sides of each issue. So who should we believe? Now, we see similar claims about bail reform. Experts paid by certain groups tell us that letting accused criminals out of jail actually reduces crime, while other experts, many have been on this podcast, tell us the exact opposite. Maybe the best way to reach the proper conclusion on these controversial issues is to get as much information as you can from a variety of sources. Now, my guest today, while she doesn't have my 40 years of experience, is quickly becoming an expert in her own right. Nicole Martinez is a bail bondsman in Colorado. Her company, 5280 or 5280 Bail Bonds, was just named as the best bail bond company in the 2025 Mile High Award program. Additionally, and perhaps more importantly, she is the president of the Colorado Association of Professional Sureties, and she is working hard to rebuild the bail bond industry in Colorado. Nicole, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning.
So tell us a little bit more about yourself. How did you get into bail? How did you end up in bail world like all the rest of us here?
Well, my experience more came from the collection. I did mortgage collections. I did repos. I did collections for quite a long time. I originally started helping a few agents with collecting money that was owed on their bonds, and then got introduced to the bail industry a little more. And I had a friend that was interested in getting her license, and we kind of ended up doing it together, and we still work in our office together today.
Well, excellent. I mean, that's sort of not the approach that most people take this. Normally, there's a law enforcement or military background or something like that. You know, a lot of times you're coming at this from the bounty hunter's perspective. Well, I was a cop for years and years, and then I saw this and got into that, or there was some family legal involvement, that sort of thing. So, but the collection aspect is important. It does give you the ability to kind of evaluate people. Because there is a financial component to bail. I mean, people, that's one of the big knocks on bail is that there's a financial component to it, but you still have to make those evaluations. I mean, if you're going to have a family member come guarantee a bond for you, your experience in collections is going to give you a different window into evaluating, will this person actually come through? Will they do what they're supposed to do? Will they make sure their kid shows up for court like they're supposed to?
Right. Yeah, it helped me in a lot of ways. A lot of the collections that I did was on vehicles. So we did repos and skip tracing. So when it came to the bail industry and we had to start looking for these defendants, I just knew if I could find a car, I could find a person. And so I used my skip tracing skills to kind of excel in that part of the industry. And so it made underwriting the bonds a little bit easier. I was able to kind of assess the risk and the kind of person that we were dealing with, and kind of able to avoid some of the problems down the road.
Well, and it's one thing that always comes with women involved. We did an episode, I think fifth or sixth episode about women in bail, one of the things got brought up is, as far as going to pick people up. I mean, are you out doing that yourself? I mean, a lot of bondsmen, when they first get into it, that's the avenue they come to it from is, well, I was a bounty hunter and started doing this. And so I moved to this bail side, but I still do all this bounty hunting stuff myself. I know that some of the women in our past podcast, they actually have an all-woman team that goes out after people. How do you generally handle your apprehensions when somebody does miscourt?
So you're right. In the beginning, it was exciting and it was, fun. And so I would go out on a lot and I still go out on some of them, more so to do the surveillance, sending out the text messages and setting up the meetings and doing kind of the background work as far as the skip tracing and setting up goes. But I do hire a recovery team that I have that does most of the muscle work.
Right.
I have kids now. I'm not big by any means. And so physically, it's just not my favorite part of, the job. So I do tend to hire a recovery company for most of that nowadays.
Well, I mean, and if you're looking for someone, you're not the type of person, you're not the Guido sitting on the corner that people are going to go, oh, I bet that guy's looking for me. They're like, hey, let's go talk to her. It's like, hey, Bob. Oh, by the way, Bob, you're under arrest. But you forget, as a bail bondsman, you have other things to do with your time. I mean, the bounty stuff is trying to save yourself money. It doesn't really make you money. And so a lot of times people seem to forget, as bail bondsmen, our goal is not to go out and pick everybody up we can. Our goal is to make sure that they show up for court in the first place, so we don't have to do that part of it.
Right.
Yeah, but people, I mean, this most recent Kevin Bacon show that just came out, The Bondsman, which is fun. Everybody should watch it. Maybe we'll talk about that in the future podcast here. But that's not what we do. Our job is to make sure people show up for court. The bounty hunter stuff comes into play when we failed at that.
Right.
So let's talk about Colorado some. I know that like 10 plus years ago, we had a whole bunch of, Colorado bondsmen who were migrating to this area because Denver and Colorado proper had bought into the bail reform argument at the time. They had announced that this was going to reduce crime. They just closed another jail, and they would save all kinds of incarceration costs. And instead, what happened is within a few months they had to reopen that old jail facility because they had too many people in custody. But this whole letting everybody go and this creating this revolving door, that Colorado did back then really decimated the bail bond industry in Colorado. So what's going on with bail in Colorado now?
So as an industry, we are down as an industry about 70%. Things that have contributed to that are, charitable bail, the soft on crime legislature that we have that has decriminalized and, reclassified crimes to make them lower level offenses. A lot of what's going on has contributed to the huge problem that we have here with the motor vehicle thefts.
Right.
Unfortunately, we just have a very far left legislature that's pushing this agenda, and we just can't seem to get ahead of it.
Well, let's talk about some of the stuff let's back up just a little bit. So I go out and I break into a car and I get arrested for that. So what happens to me subsequent to that? So do I, is there a bond schedule? Do I get held in custody for a day or two before I see a judge and have a bond set? How does the initial setting work generally in Colorado? I mean, I know every jurisdiction is going to be a little bit different, but in general terms, they're going to be pretty close.
Well, so for the most part, they changed if the car is not worth a certain amount of money, the person doesn't get arrested at all. They receive a summons to go to court a month or 3 months down the road. And they're not arrested. There's no bond that has to be posted. So unfortunately, most of the criminals have learned this. And so as long as they make sure that that vehicle isn't worth a certain amount of money, they can steal it and they can drive around with it and they can get caught with it and they just get a summons to go back to court. We used to have a bond schedule. The ACLU argued that it was unfair. And so there are bail schedules there, but more recommendations and not something that most of the judges even follow here. So we are consistently seeing bonds after, if the people do get arrested or they don't show up to that first court date and then they get arrested, we're seeing the bonds being set for $1, $100, $250. And like I said, that's after they've missed court and failed to appear. So there's no real reason that these people have stopped.
So then on misdemeanor charges, then that's what we're talking about basically, is if the car is not worth, $1,000 or $1,500 or whatever the felony threshold is, then even though it's a car, it still counts as a misdemeanor, and they're just giving you a citation to show up for court down the road.
Right.
They'll seize the car. Is that pretty standard for most misdemeanors? Are they just cite and release type tickets from all misdemeanors, or are they actually booking people in on a domestic violence or other types of misdemeanors?
So there are misdemeanors that people do get arrested for. Most of those, they get a PR bond
right
as soon as they see the judge. But in the state of Colorado, if there is a victim in regards to like domestic violence, child abuse, things like that, they are held in custody on a no bond hold until they see the judge the next day. And then once the protection orders are implemented and signed, they're allowed to post bond.
So basically what we in Kansas would call a person felony, or a crime where there's actually a victim.
Right.
So, okay, I understand. Now, I know that in Kansas, one of the things that was just passed through the legislature, I don't know if it's made it through yet because our legislature's not completely done with their session yet, but they did go through and change the auto theft law to basically upgrade any car theft to a felony, regardless of the value of the car. I mean, and part of the argument was that could be particularly devastating to someone who has, a $750 car, but it's their only vehicle. It's the only way they can get back and forth to work. Someone steals that car, and then they've lost their job because they can't get to work. And, it's a misdemeanor charge that's a slap on the wrist when we'll put you on diversion or what have you, rather than actually doing something. So Kansas did introduce legislation to upgrade all auto thefts, regardless of the value of the vehicle, to at least a low-level felony. And then, of course, they've still got if you go steal a Bentley, it's going to be, level 7 or something like that versus, your Hyundai that you're stealing.
Right.
So, I mean, those are still there, but they're upgrading them all for that reason. It doesn't sound like Colorado's, quite there and wanting to increase in crime stuff. But let's talk about some of the stuff that's been in the news. Colorado got 3 or 4 different things to talk about, and hopefully you can enlighten us some. It really made the news right around the election time. We had, the whole notion of Venezuelan gangs taking over apartments in Aurora. So was that something that was making big news in Colorado as well? Or is that something that you've experienced when you've got people that are missing court having to go into some of these areas?
So it is an issue. We have had bonds that we've posted that obviously we've been dealing with, immigration on, and we're a sanctuary city. So when we post these bonds, not only are we not notified that they're illegal, they won't tell us, they don't notify immigration. So it's increasing our risk, obviously. And yeah, when we're going to pick these people up, they have no history. So there's no way to try to track them down. A lot of these apartments now have been closed, which displaced these people and has them scattered all over now. So it's definitely made it harder for us to locate them. But there are still people living in a lot of these apartments and areas. And unfortunately, with the sanctuary protections that we have here, they are getting the same $1,200 bond, $500 bond, $1,000 bond. And because we have no way to check or know if these people are here legally, some of us are, getting these bonds and we're posting them because they have a friend that they've met here that signed for it, or an employer or somebody that was willing to help them, their child's friend from school's parent that signed for the bond. And so there's just no way for us to know that they're illegal.
Well, and so that sanctuary protection that they're providing them, I'm assuming they're not extending that to you in the bond forfeiture context. If ICE does come grab them later on outside that, they just go, hey, your person wasn't here. You still have to pay the bond forfeiture.
Right. We have to prove that the person was removed from the country in order for us to get released from the bond liability.
So there is at least that. If you can prove that, I understand that proving that is a whole odyssey in and of itself. But in theory, if you could prove that, they do offer some degree of relief there. Then
yes, if you can prove it, if you can, get their A number, which is essentially like their social security number,
right?
Which a lot of people and families won't give you or don't have, or you can't, get a hold of. But if you're able to provide proof that they were removed, you can get off the bond. So these people that are sitting in, detention centers here, and they're not being removed because of the sanctuary protections, but they're not being released. So our bonds are sitting in this kind of limbo area where the judges are extending more time to see what happens, but we're not being released from the bond liability. So it's a weird gray area. We're all trying to just work through it. But it's new. It's definitely newer for us.
Well, and having been through the first Trump administration and seen that ramp up in immigration enforcement that we saw in 16 and 17, well, 17 and 18, I guess more so, we actually had gone to the legislature ourselves to go, hey, we need some help here. We've bonded these people out on the assumption that they weren't going to be deported because these were not deportable offenses, or at least they were, but they weren't being enforced. And so we were, operating from, what the standard of practice was. And now the standard of practice has changed. And all these people we have on bond were being held out to dry. Now, a lot of us here in Kansas, looked at this and saw the way the wind was blowing on this. And so we've made adjustments in our bond. But most places here do not have that same sanctuary policy. They'll acknowledge that there's an ICE detainer. But I've seen personally a rapid increase in the number of people that are being turned over to ICE, since the 20th of January. It is ramped up significantly. People, you're seeing people that are stopped on traffic tickets that, then they get released on a signature bond, but they're being released to ICE. Because they've gone back to, if you were born out of the country, they're just notifying ICE. Do you want this person? You not want this person? And ICE has 48 hours to say yay or nay. And if they say yay, they got 48 hours to come pick them up. And so
we don't notify immigration here. Immigration sits outside of the jails here.
Right.
And it makes it dangerous. It makes it dangerous for the immigration officers. It makes it dangerous for the people that are just sitting out there having lunch or picking up a friend or coming from the courthouse across the street. And, we've been out there posting a bond and you see some guy coming out of the jail and he sees the immigration and takes off running and they're all chasing him down the street and they have 4 or 5 cars pulling up and everybody's looking around like, what's going on? And it's simply because the jails cannot notify them, let them come in the lobby, tell them the person's about to get released. They just have to sit there and wait until they see them come walking out the doors.
So it's just a disaster waiting to happen. I mean, it's just going to end up somebody getting hurt or killed over one of these sorts of deals where, ICE is doing their job. They could have controlled that person easily while they were still in custody.
Right.
Just we'll walk in your room, put your handcuffs on, walk you out and take you to this next facility. And instead now we've got potentially dangerous situations, car chases, what have you, going on, and somebody's going to get hurt.
Right.
And then the finger pointing will start after that.
Yeah.
So I just saw an article as well and this is one of the things that we did an interview with Jeff Burton Barton out of Missouri, talking about the Wayne Lozier case, the federal kidnapping charge. And I did just see in Mesa County, a case against a bounty hunter was dismissed, but then the state appealed that to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals just ruled it was State v. Hill or something like that they should not have dismissed the case. I don't know. Are you familiar with this case at all, where the bounty hunter was dressed in tactical clothing, went in to pick someone up, and then of course, a firefight, ensued. But the Court of Appeals was saying that because he was dressed in tactical clothing and because he didn't, expressly let the apartment complex know that he wasn't a police officer, that he should have been guilty of trespass because he was trespassing by ruse.
Right.
Have you followed that case at all? I mean, are your people there, the bounty hunters that you work with?
So I'm not familiar with those agents, like personally.
Right.
Mesa County's pretty far from Denver, so we don't do too much out there. But the big thing with the big take home with all of the recovery agents that are getting, jammed up is that Colorado does not have regulations when it comes to recovery agents.
Right.
It's like non-existent here. They treat it as if that's not a thing, that bounty hunting doesn't exist. So it makes it difficult when they're trying to prosecute people in these kind of cases. It makes it difficult because there's no regulation and they don't know who to go to ask, is this how things are supposed to happen? What should have, happened? Who should he have notified? So there's no guidelines for that.
Right. So there's not, I know a lot of states, Kansas, Missouri are both included, that you're supposed to notify the police before you go to try and pick someone up. There may or may not be a specific licensing requirement, like bail bondsmen themselves. If you're licensed as a bail bondsman, you don't have to be licensed as a bail enforcement agent. If you're not a bail bondsman, then in Kansas you have to have a bail enforcement agent's license, but it's not onerous to get one. But there are requirements and notifications. So is there no notification requirement in Colorado law at all?
Again, for a bail agent.
Right. To notify the police before you go try and pick someone up.
When we go out, we would notify the police, but
okay.
A recovery agent, they're not regulated.
Okay.
So there's no, it would be the correct thing to do. That's how we train them to do that. But you have these rogue agents that go out and they know that there's no regulation. And so they don't have to do any of these things that even the bail agents are required to do because there's no regulation.
Well, I mean, the thing that particularly bothered me about this is it's not uncommon at all for bounty hunters to wear, a vest or something that says agent or fugitive recovery on it, and maybe even a badge that says fugitive recovery. Some states have requirements that you must wear some identifying, clothing or a badge or something, and some say you can't do anything about that at all. Colorado doesn't appear to have some, but essentially this individual contacted the apartment complex. He knew where the guy was staying. He was staying with his brother, and tried to get the apartment complex to let him in, which they did. And of course, after the fact, after the shooting developed, the apartment complex people were like, well, we thought it was the police, telling us to do this. And it's like, and he didn't ever say he was the police. There's never any question about that. But their argument was that because he left the impression by his appearance that he could have been law enforcement, that was trespass by ruse, or that he had misled them by his appearance without ever expressly saying that he was law enforcement, which strikes me as problematic. I mean, it just, I see a whole lot of case law that comes related to bail that is like, well, we just don't like this situation, so we're going to make this ruling in this way because it relates to bail bondsmen. Whereas if you were a car salesman and there was some regulation there and you were selling a car, if you were supposed to expressly identify what's your license number, or there was no requirement, they wouldn't do anything along those same lines. So it bothers me, and it's something I would think in Colorado that probably need to be concerned about, because this ruling just came down like 2 months ago. It was just published. Now he won his case. The case was dismissed, so they can't retry him. But the DA's office there took it to the Court of Appeals, and so now, what happens if you're out trying to pick somebody up and you're dressed in that way? Do you have to get everybody you contact sign a piece of paper saying, "Oh no, I acknowledge that the person I just spoke to is not law enforcement"? It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anyway, but not a whole lot of experience with that on your end just yet anyway. So probably more importantly, you've had some stuff going on in the legislature, and I assume that as the association, you're trying to pay close attention to what's going on in the legislature. You're working from a deficit because of the mix in your legislature there. But I saw that a Jarvis Caldwell from Colorado Springs was just recently elected. Seems like he would be a friend to the industry to a certain extent. Had introduced a bill, House Bill 1072. Have you followed that one at all?
1072. Yes, I believe we have that on our watch here.
And so, and the thing is, it seemed pretty mild. Essentially, there were some restrictions on signature bonds, and that if a person had a record of conviction for a violent crime, or what we would call here a person crime, in the prior 2 years, or there were at least 2 pending criminal charges against the person that were crimes of violence, that then you couldn't give them a signature bond. It's like, who are you not giving signature bonds to at this point? if you're saying that, well, we're going to let these violent criminals go unless they also have, 2 ongoing criminal cases for violent crime at the same time. You're following that? Do you know the status of that bill? It looks like it may have kind of gotten into limbo there.
I believe that bill was killed. I don't believe that bill is. I don't believe anything's happening with that one. I have it on my list here yeah.
I guess the argument is, how do you pass anything if you can't pass something like that? Because to place some restrictions. You could have made an argument that, because I think he was setting, the bill, was mandating at least a $7,500 bond for those charges.
Yeah.
But if you pick up a new charge and you're out on release for 2 additional violent crimes at the same time, what judge in their right mind, I guess you can explain that better than I could, would be giving you a signature bond in that case? Are you just asking for those people, to go out and commit additional crimes?
Absolutely. We have been down at that Capitol testifying on so many of these bills that are being, that are coming up, and that they're being sponsored, and there's just we have been killed when it comes to the bills and what they're slowly just chipping away at the bail industry. I think this is the second time they've tried to get that bill passed with that specific language of the minimum monetary bond of at least $7,500.
Right.
There was also another bill that they were trying to get passed, or that we were talking about, which would limit the amount of PR bonds that a person can receive. The argument came where they wanted to allow them, they wouldn't allow them to get PR bonds after their fifth failure to appear.
Only 5, huh?
Right. So we just, I mean, I honestly just don't know how we even get, anything passed with the legislature that we have when it comes to bail.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit too, and because I wanted to look at like charitable bail in Colorado, and so I was doing a little bit of research on the Colorado Freedom Fund, and I want to talk some more about that with you. But I did notice that the founder and executive director of the Colorado Freedom Fund was named, or is named, Elizabeth Epps.
Right.
And she's an actual state legislator?
She was.
She was. Okay. So no longer.
Right. She was.
Well, I guess that's one bonus, but that seems to me like you have some serious conflict issues for that. So talk about the Colorado Freedom Fund a little bit. What's going on with charitable bail? So I mean, you're letting everybody go, or the courts are letting everybody go. You get cite and release on your misdemeanor charges, and you're stealing cheap cars and getting a ticket for that rather than arrested. So what bonds are these charitable bail funds? What are they posting?
Well, if you read their website and their Facebook and things like that, their goal is to bail out people that are in jail because they're poor. People that are in jail because, they've missed court, because they're homeless, or these crimes of poverty, right? But what we know is that most of the crimes here, most of the things like that have been decriminalized, and so those are not bondable offenses anymore. So what they've had to do now is post riskier bonds and take on, different liability. I had a recovery agent that was at the Adams County Jail the other night, about 4 nights ago, when the Elizabeth Epps from the Freedom Fund walked in and posted a $50,000 bond on a defendant. So I'm not sure what type of charges this person had, or the person's name, because she was real vague about giving out information, but a $50,000 bond in our state is probably not a crime of poverty.
Well, especially not if the legislature won't allow you to set $7,500 bonds on, triple, violent crime offenders.
Right.
So any idea how much funding? Because $50,000 seems like a lot. I did an interview with a chief and retired chief of police from Los Angeles, and so they were looking at bail funds there. But like the Minnesota Freedom Fund, they start off posting like $10,000, $12,000 worth of bonds a month, and they would limit themselves to like $500, so they could do traffic stuff that really did seem like this person might be sitting in custody simply because they can't pay a traffic ticket or something like that. And of course, after the George Floyd death, a lot of these groups just exploded in the level of funding that they had, because it was somehow, even though Floyd had nothing to do with bail, this was somehow the way that we were going to, express our outrage. So any idea, is that funding stream still there? I know that we've seen some different stuff come out recently with USAID and Act Blue. I know that Act Blue, one of the political groups that supposedly there's some questionable funding to, is the National Bailout. And I think, what was the other one? There's one of the Open Society Foundation beneficiaries that I think also showed was a pretty good funder for this group, for the the bail fund, the National Charitable Bail Fund Association. Do we know where Colorado Freedom Fund funding comes from mostly?
That's our big thing with this Freedom Fund is transparency. Where's the money going? What bonds are they posting? How much of this money are they getting back in remission, and where is it going? As a bail agent, I'm a licensed surety agent. I have to report all of the bonds that I post to my insurance company. Our licensed cash agents have to report all of the bonds that they post to the state of Colorado. Where are they reporting? Who are they reporting to? The fact that they have such a huge influence in the legislature and the bills that are being passed is also a huge issue for us. And so we've been working, taking meetings with representatives and, bringing up these questions and trying to figure out, how we get them to provide this information.
So, do we any idea what the level? I mean, because I know it's a charity in theory, so 501c3 or whatever.
Yes.
But one of the things that they normally as charities have to disclose someplace, and again, I don't know where, but I know like Red Cross and March of Dimes and all those other ones are supposed to be disclosing how much of their revenue, how much of the money that they get in is going towards operations and how much is going towards the actual service they're offering. And some of these, it's crazy. I mean, 93% goes to their operational cost and 7% goes to the charitable function that they purport to represent. But when you have that level of administrative costs, it's just a way to make money, and you're not really providing any sort of service. And I'm just kind of wondering if anybody's looked at or if these bail funds are required to make that same reporting as other charities.
From what we have not been able to find that information on the Colorado Freedom Fund. So, I don't know if they're required to do that. That's what we're working to find out right now. We're still, our session is still going on as well. So we're kind of in the end of that and just waiting to see which of these bills that they sponsored and initiated and, had representatives sponsor are going to get passed.
Okay. Now, you had also mentioned earlier, and I think I saw on your Facebook page that a friend of yours had their vehicle stolen,
Right.
and then that's a big problem. And I noticed, did a little bit of research on that, and then I saw that in 2023, Colorado saw a major milestone in fighting crime. It went from having the highest rate of automobile theft in the country to only having the second highest rate of automobile theft in the country. So, what's going on with car theft in Colorado?
So the big push to decriminalize a lot of that was from 2019.
Right.
In January in 2023, they did change the classification again back to a felony.
Okay.
So we are seeing the effects of that. It's slow, but we are seeing that it is decreasing slowly with the amount of motor vehicle thefts that were getting reported.
Well, one of the arguments that I've always made, and we've talked about on the podcast before, is that automobile theft is a pretty good indicator of overall crime. You have a lot of crimes that don't get reported. It's a lot of domestic violence in the home. Well, I'm not going to call the police because I don't want, my breadwinner to be taken out of the house or what have you. A lot of thefts. Well, I'm not going to report this because, the police are going to come out and take a report. It's going to take me more time to make this report than they're actually going to do anything. But automobile theft is, a lot of times people have insurance for their cars. And if you're going to make an insurance claim, that insurance company wants you to make that police report. And so what level of reporting occurs on automobile theft? And so you'll see areas where crime is way down, but automobile thefts are way up. So that's generally, in my mind, that's generally a disconnect between the actual crime that's occurring and how much that crime is being reported. And I saw that there was a news article that in 2023, the Department of Justice issued a report showing that from 2017 to 2019, Colorado had the highest rate of violent victimization among the 22 most populous states, but only about 40% of those crimes were reported to the police. And additionally, it had the second highest property crime rate in that group of states. But those property crimes were only being reported about 30% of the time. So, and the news articles pointed out that the crime has only gotten worse in Colorado since 2019. What's your perspective on the ground? What does this say about how bail reform is working in Colorado?
I think it shows that it's not working. Unfortunately, the intention was great, right? Like the intention of bail reform is great. We, in the beginning, believed that a lot of the stuff that they were, saying is true. We don't want to see people sit in jail because they didn't have their dog on a leash, or they, trespassed because they are homeless and they were sleeping in the park. And we get those kind of things. We didn't want to see that happening either. But what it cultivated was a breed of people that know that they can steal X amount of dollars worth of stuff, that they can break into your home, that they can steal from your car, that they can, do all of these property crimes. And as long as they don't hit that threshold, that nothing will happen to them. And so we have retail theft that's out of control. You can't go into a store and buy, dish soap without asking for them to come unlock it. The motor vehicle theft problem, the amount of businesses that have closed. I have my bank, my bank for my business accounts, sent out a letter and said, due to the crime and the amount of, they put up one of those housing units about a block away for the homeless and the migrants. And, due to the crime and everything, they closed down the entire branch. Our only option now is to drive 45 minutes west or 35 minutes east to go to the bank now, because our city is getting just overtaken by the crime and the homeless and the migrants and all of the problems that, this sanctuary city regulations have cultivated.
Well, I know we frame the argument a lot that, well, we sort of agree with some of this, and yes and no. I think part of the argument, I don't really think that people are sitting in custody for the sole reason that they can't afford bail. I mean, at a very simplistic level, sure. I mean, if your bond's $10 million and you're sitting in custody because you can't post your $10 million bond, yeah, it's because you can't afford bail. No, I mean, that's not really it. I mean, the bail is you need to give some assurance that you're going to be back to answer those charges against you. And we really do, the counter argument just really comes, they argue that the presumption of innocence means we can't hold anybody in custody. And my argument on this has always been that the presumption of innocence is the reason we have bail in the first place. If we didn't have the presumption of innocence, there'd be no reason to give people bail. But that doesn't mean we have to fall on our swords over the presumption of innocence to say that this person is, likely to have committed this crime. They need to give us some sort of assurance that they're going to be back to answer these charges against them. That's the whole notion of due process. Not, oh, hey, we have to have a trial and convict you before we can hold you on a pretrial basis. What's the point of that? So I'll tell a story here. When I was 16 years old, so I mean, 40 years of bail bonds, that's been a long time ago. I had a job, like a summer job, where I was delivering tractor tires. And so I would, take the truck, the company truck, and, they'd throw a couple of tractor tires, and I'd drive off to some farm in the middle of nowhere to take them their tractor tires and pick up their old ones so they could redo them. And so it's, 5:55 and I'm flying along the road trying to get to this small town because back then nothing was open after 6 o'clock and I'm almost out of gas. And so I get pulled over, almost out of gas, speeding ticket, and which wasn't even that big a deal, except that I was in Kansas, had a Kansas driver's license. I was in a business vehicle and I had to post a $75 cash bond right there on the side of the road for a speeding ticket. And then, of course, I had to then make some phone calls and beg and plead and fortunately, it was a small town and we were able to get a hold of somebody to actually open up the gas station so I wasn't stuck there for a whole night. Because obviously I didn't get there by 6 o'clock, when I got stopped for my speeding ticket. But there was a time, granted, 40 plus years ago, where if you didn't live in the town, you're going to post a bond right then for a non-jailable offense. And so the idea that we have, homeless people sleeping under a bridge saying, well, we arrested you for stealing and maybe possession of the heroin that you're shooting up, which is the reason you're sleeping under a bridge, but we can't hold you in custody because you don't have any money in your pocket. Well, you had enough money to buy the heroin we caught you with. Why is it we can't require you to give us some sort of assurance, and we don't have any other methods of assurance? I mean, if somebody sues you and wants punitive damages, they don't want you to be taken out and caned. They want you to pay them money.
Right.
Money is the way we make these evaluations. For better or for ill, that is the only yardstick that we have for this. And so it's not crazy that we would use money or some sort of financial obligation to inspire behavior. It's what we do in our tax code. So anyway, I'm ranting here, so I don't want to go too far off on that. But I don't necessarily agree with the idea that we shouldn't be holding people until they can give us some sort of assurance. It's a tough argument to make. Well, this person's poor and they can't get out of jail. I don't know that there really are a whole lot of crimes of poverty. Theft generally, if you're out looting your big screen TV, you're not stealing that because you need food for your family. You're stealing because you want a big screen TV and you want it for free. That's not necessarily a crime of poverty. I just don't think that we're really there on that. Okay, so what else is going on in Colorado that we really need to worry about? So tell me what's going on. Is there anything going on in the legislature that you think you can introduce or that you can sway people? Can you get law enforcement on your side? I know there was some big shooting that law enforcement is really starting to turn on bail reform issues. Do they have that kind of sway to make that change in the legislature? Or are we just waiting for the next horrific event to occur?
Unfortunately, I think that they're waiting for, I think it's going to take something else to happen. The incident that happened specifically was in Douglas County, and they're not as, I guess they're a lot less liberal than Denver is. I don't see that coming to Denver yet. I mean, we've been down at the Capitol and we've listened to the sheriffs testify. We've listened to, all of these different people come in and testify in regards to these devastating things that are happening and instances and talking about these victims and these, things that are going on. And it doesn't seem to matter. It's all about, the poor criminal and how we can get them, help, and they need drug rehab and they need mental, they need different types of help. That jail isn't the answer. The big thing with even the Colorado Freedom Fund is that, we're keeping these poor people in jail. However, the bail industry is the only option that gives these people a 90% discount when it comes to posting bond. They're an abolitionist group that wants to just get rid of bail altogether. Where does that leave these poor people? Where does it leave the people that can't afford bail? They can't bond out everybody. So what happens to everybody else? They just sit there there's no answer. Nobody has, okay, well, let's get rid of bail. Then what? What's the answer for that? We are 100%, free to the taxpayers. We provide a service where we guarantee that these people are going to show up to court. We look out for the victim. Unfortunately, we seem to be the only ones that are doing that.
Well, it certainly doesn't sound like your legislature is taking a anti-crime or strong on crime stance on things.
Right.
And anyway, I do want to touch on another thing before we kind of wrap this up, and because it's the one thing that we're seeing more and more around the country, but sort of what is it originator in Colorado was legalization of marijuana. Now, I've got some family in Colorado, and that was there was a big push back in the day, and the promises that were made at the time was that this would all be private use, constrained to in someone's house. You wouldn't see it out and about in the streets. There wouldn't be any problems with it. And of course, we were just in Las Vegas for a convention here recently, and every third person that I walked down the street, you could just smell the weed smell wafting off of them. The last time I was in Denver, there were clouds of smoke out of the public parks, which certainly was not what was sold to people when they passed the constitutional amendment to allow that. How much do you think? I mean, granted, weed's been legal there, or marijuana's been legal in Colorado for a while, but how much do you think that has contributed to the increase in crime? I think Colorado still has one of the higher drug overdose rates in the country. Obviously, one of the higher crime rates in the country. There's the whole notion, obviously, charitable bail has an impact on that. Marijuana legalization has an impact on that, even though that wasn't supposed to be the case. We were supposed to be able to decriminalize all this stuff when we legalize it. How do you think legalization of marijuana and that mindset and the people that brought into Colorado, how is that affecting the entire criminal justice system there in the state? A simple answer.
Yeah, well, it definitely, the decriminalization of it, I don't post very many bonds that have anything to do with possession or anything like that. When it comes to the marijuana,
right?
The people that it's brought in obviously is a different issue. It has brought in the criminal aspect from all of our surrounding states. But a lot of those people come in, they, purchase what they came to purchase, and a lot of them leave. Some of them, obviously, that do get in trouble here, we have the issue of them leaving and not coming back.
Sure.
But as far as like the overall, I guess, issue of it, I don't see, we don't see as much coming from the marijuana as we do like the fentanyl issue that we have. That brings out the real hardened addicts and the real hardened criminals and the desperate people that are out here committing these property crimes to get that next high. With the legalization of the marijuana, people don't have to do the sketchy things to get it. You can walk in to any dispensary on any corner, sure, and purchase it legally. And I don't think that it's as big of a problem as people have made it. It's definitely not liked by a lot of the residents, especially like you're saying, people that want to take their kids to the park. And it's so normalized now. The police are not going to come pull you over or tell you to leave or take it from you or anything like that.
Well, I think one of the arguments on that was, if you're going to be, it's one thing to just recreationally use marijuana here and there. I mean, again, I'm not a big fan, of even that. But if you're a regular marijuana user, what sort of job can you hold? I mean, if you're going to work like a heavy equipment operator, can you be stoned all the time? Can you even pass a drug screen? Companies still have drug screens that you have to pass. So how many people are involved in heavy drug usage, even if it's something just like marijuana, can maintain a job? And if they can't maintain a job, crime flows from that.
Right.
I mean, that was one of the arguments as far as, what's the cause and effect? Is the fact that you're poor the reason you commit crime, or is it the fact you commit crime makes you poor because you cannot, maintain your job or your income?
Right. Well, I have noticed a lot of jobs don't drug test here now because of the decriminalization. If they drug tested, they couldn't hire anybody.
Right.
So a lot of jobs, I had a friend go apply at the post office a few days ago, and even at the post office, he was not required to do a drug screening and got a job working in the warehouse at the post office, or, I don't know very many jobs that do. If you're a truck driver, or, there are still certain jobs that require you to not to not use drugs at all across the board. But I've noticed that a lot of jobs here don't require that anymore now that they've decriminalized.
Well, I guess we know now why the mail is so slow.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Nicole,
I don't know. I guess we'll have to see how this all plays out. The session is almost over here, so.
Yeah, ours is getting close to being over as well. We've had a pretty active session. Lots of different things going on as far as, there's, and that was the other thing. The one last thing on my notes is you guys just recently passed a constitutional amendment to deny bail to first-degree murderers. And I was really impressed. I don't know if you were involved in that at all. Most of the time when we see these anti-bail constitutional amendments, they don't just limit themselves to something like that. I mean, so the argument for that constitutional amendment was that, the language in the Constitution was that you shall be bailable by sufficient solvent surety, except in capital cases where proof is great and presumption strong, or whatever the other language is. But basically, you had a right to bail unless you were charged with a death penalty case. And of course, then Colorado abolished the death penalty. And so then there were no death penalty cases. And so if death penalty was not on the table, well, then we had to give, bond to accused murderers. And so, but and that's an argument that's made in other states as well. But most of the time when other states do that, they don't just limit themselves to, well, we're just going to restrict it for this one particular crime or murder or what have you. They'll go, oh, we're going to do this. And then everybody else has to be let go, or there's some attachment to that. And I noticed that Colorado was very clinical and precise about that they passed that, and it really did only apply to first-degree murders. It's just like they'd replaced capital crime with first-degree murder. I don't know if you were involved in that, or, advocating for or against that, because it seemed like that's not something that the bail bond industry is going to be opposed to. Generally, what we have problems with is are we starting a slippery slope? Well, if we go into the Constitution and modify that to deny bail here, do we then deny bail here? We've seen that in Tennessee. Now we're denying bail to a whole host of different crimes in Tennessee, or potentially anyway, and other states as well. So can you talk a little bit more about the constitutional amendment? Did you guys get involved in that at all, or?
We didn't get too involved. It was something that we monitored. I believe that they were very precise in the wording of that in order to get it passed the way that they did.
Right.
But it is something that we, like you said, that we're worried that later on down the road, it might open the door for them to limit bail on other, charges or offenses. And so, I believe that's why they were so specific in the verbiage to get that passed.
Well, and that's a tough argument. The more esoteric argument about the right to bail is really tough to make when you've got people that are victims of crime. Even things that are less serious, but still not equally, but obviously damaging. I mean, the rapes and sexual offenses and stuff along those lines. You can sit there and it's like, I don't want to be having to go to the legislature, or these rapists, they really need to have a bond, because that's not a winning argument. But then you have to argue that, well, everybody has a right to bail. There's a presumption of innocence and all that. But anyway, I was impressed with how precise and limited that constitutional amendment was there. So I guess you guys, it's not responsible for that, but it was a good thing for Colorado that they kept it that way.
Right.
Well, let's wrap it up here. And Nicole, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So if people want to find you, obviously you're the best bail bondsman in Denver, according to the 2025 Mile High Awards program. Can they reach you at your do you have a website for your bonding company? Is it a Facebook page? How do people get a hold of you?
We do. We have both. Our website is 5280bailbonds.com, and then we're on Facebook just as 5280 Bail Bonds.
And so that's the Mile High, the 5280.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. Excellent.
Yeah.
And then the Colorado Association of Professional Sureties, CAPS, do they also have a website and a Facebook page, or just?
We do. We're at cobail.org.
Okay.
For our website, and on Facebook under the Colorado Association of Professional Sureties.
All right, excellent. So how expansive have you gotten there? I know that obviously there's been a lot of contraction in the bail bond industry in Colorado, but have they come to their senses? Are most bonding companies are they trying to be a part of the association? Because I mean it is very important to have a working association that can go represent your interests at the state legislature as best as possible. And the more people you can have involved in that, the better. But are you getting those people roped in to where they can help you out?
We're still struggling a little with membership. We have grown in the past, 2-3 years that we've been trying to get, get us going.
Right.
We're a newer association. And we are probably at about 3 times the members we were when we stepped in. So we are trying, and hopefully, now that people see the work that we've put in and the conventions that we've been doing and the things that we've been doing down at the Capitol, we can get some more participation.
Well, hopefully. I mean, I've been doing this on our association for at least 20 plus years. And it's a tough sell every time. It's like, well, don't tell me what to do, or you're doing this and this is bad for me and this is bad. It's like, the whole goal here is to preserve the industry for everybody and to support public safety. And so, but that can be a hard sell when you're asking, especially if you're going to people going, hey, we need some membership dues because we've got to pay for all this. And some of this stuff is for free. And like, wow, why should I pay you when I can do that myself? Like, because you can't.
Yeah.
Because, as an organization, you need to have, a good public face and a good public argument that you put forward. And it sounds like you're getting there. It's just, it will take some time.
Right.
Anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. Best of luck with both your, award-winning bonding company and the Colorado Association of Professional Sureties. I do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Best of luck in the future. We would like to thank our guest, Nicole Martinez, for joining us on the podcast. You can find her on Facebook at 5280 Bail Bonds, or the Colorado Association of Professional Sureties Facebook page, or their websites. It's very important that bail bondsmen work together, and Nicole is an example of someone who is taking charge to try and save the industry in her state, particularly given the onslaught it's under there. And we hope that you'll join us on the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we'll continue to bring you critical information and conversations with people involved in the criminal justice system in the Midwest and all over the country. So come back and see us. Thanks, guys.
Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf and executive produced by David Stuckman.